The Life of Kirigaya Kazuto, aka Kirito, from Sword Art Online. Kirigaya Kazuto, born as Narusaka Kazuto and known as Kirito in Sword Art Online, ALfheim Online, Gale Online, and Project Alicization, is the protagonist of the main Sword Art Online series. Welcome to the Amagi. In today's video, we're going over the life of Kirigaya Kazuto. Before we begin, we publish a new video every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. The Amagi's reach stretches beyond just this channel, so if you're a fan of us, please consider subscribing to our other channels and following us on all of our social media accounts. Please help us reach our goal of passing 100,000 followers on all of our accounts by the end of the year, and with that out of the way, let's get into the video. Background. Born on October 7, 2008, Narusaka Kazuto was adopted by his aunt and uncle a year after his birth, when his biological parents died in an accident. Raised by his foster parents as a son, Kazuto was originally forced to train with his cousin in the neighborhood kendo dojo. However, due to his aunt's influence as an editor for a computer systems magazine, Kazuto became more interested in computers and dropped kendo after 2 years. This decision earned him a heavy beating from his grandfather, prompting Suguha to defend him by promising to practice enough for both of them. At the age of 10, Kazuto discovered that he was adopted from erased JukiNet records, and since then unintentionally began distancing himself from Suguha. Sword Art Online Closed Beta. One of the lucky 1,000 players accepted into the closed beta, Kirito logged hundreds of hours of playtime. He, along with the other top players, were able to reach the 10th floor before the beta had ended. Aincrad Arc. Shortly after logging into the fully released SAO, Kirito was stopped by a stranger. Klein, a new guy, asks for his help in learning how to play. After befriending each other and training in the fields for several hours, they were forcefully teleported back to the town of beginnings to receive an announcement from Kayaba Akihiko. He revealed that the lack of a logout function, which they had recently realized, was a feature of his new game, and that forced removal of the nerve gear headpiece from the other side would fry the person's brain using microwaves. The only means to escape was to clear the game. In other words, to successfully defeat all 100 floors of Aincrad and defeat the final boss. Kirito immediately took Klein and ran off, and after hearing that Klein would remain with his friends here, left him and headed off to the next town. Okay, so before we get into the Aincrad arc in full, I'd like to mention a couple of things. Now, there's a lot of things that happened during the Aincrad arc that are covered in the novel series Sword Art Online Progressive, which covers Kirito and company's journey floor by floor. Right now, there's no footage of any of this, so for the sake of the video, we'll only be covering what the anime's covered. If you want to see us cover Progressive in the future, especially after the films come out, let us know. Aria of a Starless Night. December 2022, having arrived at Tolbana, Kirito attended a meeting which took place at the town square at 1600, before momentarily parting ways. The meeting was organized by a player named Diavel. 44 people went to the meeting and decided to try to defeat the first floor boss, discovered in Argo's strategy guide to be ALfheim the Kobold Lord. As the members gathered themselves into parties at Diavel's suggestion, Kirito and a mysterious fencer found themselves without a group. Kirito offered to form a party with a female player and was accepted, upon which he learned her name was Asuna. They were assigned to support E Group, charged with clearing the monsters that accompanied the boss. After the meeting, upon learning of Asuna's complete ignorance of MMO game mechanics, Kirito offered to explain MMO terms and strategies to her in detail so as to improve her chances of survival, but she requested the lesson take place where they would not be seen. In the town, they both began to eat the bread. Kirito gave her a pot of cream and later explained how he had obtained the item and offered to give tips on how to gain the item efficiently, but the player quickly rejected his offer, stating that she didn't come to town to eat good food. Kirito questioned why she was in the town and listened to her explanation. After the clarification, Kirito began to apologize but was interrupted by the clock bell. On December 4th, when the boss raid party gathered in Tolbana for the upcoming boss battle, Kirito was approached by Kibao, who gruffly ordered him and Asuna to only engage stray ruined kobold sentinels during the battle. Diavel began his speech to the raid party. Several hours later, the raid group finally reached the doors to the boss room. Before the battle began, Kirito reminded Asuna to aim her sword skills at the throats of the ruined kobold sentinels after he secured an opening. Resolving to ensure Asuna's survival, he faced the doors and followed the other raid members as they charged into the boss room and commenced battle with ALfheim and his guards. All went well until ALfheim's last HP bar reached its last third. Instead of a Talwar, as was originally carried in the beta, he now carried a Nodachi. In this turn of events, Diavel was heavily wounded and subsequently died, after Kirito realized that Diavel had been a beta tester as well. Kirito then reorganized the shocked players and, with Asuna, worked together to take down the boss. After an intense battle, one of the tanks made a mistake and triggered ALfheim's Sumu Jiguruma. Kirito quickly countered the attack with Sonic Leap, causing the boss to tumble and allowing everyone to attack in full force while the boss was recovering. However, just as the boss's HP neared depletion, it recovered while the tanks were still recovering from their post-motion delays, prompting Kirito and Asuna to finish off the boss themselves. Kirito finally managed to deal the last attack on the boss and gained a unique item from it, the Coat of Midnight. However, as the raid party celebrated their victory, someone from Group C brought up the death of Diavel and blamed Kirito for withholding information, which led to Diavel's death. Kirito then realized that the beta testers needed to make peace with the regular players before the beta tester hatred went out of hand. Therefore, Kirito created a new category of players called beaters, who were the only ones withholding information for their own benefit, and dubbed himself as one of them, so that all of the hate and rage would be focused on him rather than upon all beta testers. After this announcement, Kirito decided to open the second floor and activate its teleport gate. However, while he was enjoying the view of the floor, Asuna followed him to show her gratitude, as well as to relay two worded messages from Gale and Kibao. Red-Nosed Reindeer. One day, when Kirito was walking the labyrinth area of a lower floor, he met Sachi and the others in the Moonlit Black Cats Guild. After rescuing them from the labyrinth, he hid his higher level from them and was invited into the guild. He helped them reach higher levels, taught Sachi how to fight, and had fun with them. One day, Sachi ran away from the group and Kirito used his tracking skill to find her. He talked with her and made her forget her fear of dying, while she helped him clear his conscience of lying to the other members of the guild. One day, the group decided to hunt for treasure while their leader Keita was off to buy their guild base. In a labyrinth on a higher floor, they activated a trap, causing a multitude of dark dwarf miners and granite elementals to spawn. The members, unable to use teleport crystals due to the room being an anti-crystal area, were all killed one by one, except for Kirito. He returned to their temporary headquarters in Taft to inform Keita, who jumped off the floating castle of Aincrad, out of shock at the loss of his friends, and the reveal that their newest member was a beater. With the approach of Christmas Eve, all of the NPCs started talking about a mysterious monster which would appear on Christmas and drop rare items if defeated, causing players to look for clues regarding its future location. However, nobody could find a good lead, as the NPCs said it would spawn at a certain fir tree. Originally, Kirito and Klein had not cared about the boss until they learned it would drop a resurrection item. When Kirito found the spawn location of the boss within the Forest of Wandering, Klein and his guild, Furin Kazan, followed him there so that they could fight the boss. Moments later, the Divine Dragon Alliance, DDA, who had followed Klein and his guild, showed up. Klein told Kirito that the Alliance would do anything to obtain any rare item, and then told Kirito to defeat the boss while they distracted the DDA. Kirito then arrived at the correct tree, and when the bell announced midnight, the event boss, Nicholas the Renegade, spawned and was about to begin its speech, but Kirito attacked it without listening to him. After a long struggle and barely surviving, Kirito defeated the boss and obtained the Divine Stone of Returning Soul. But to his disappointment, the item only revived players up to 10 seconds after they had died. After several minutes of mourning, Kirito then gave the item to Klein and slowly walked back to his inn. He stayed up until early morning planning to die trying to solo the floor boss once dawn broke. However, at 7 o'clock, when he was about to leave, he heard a strange alarm ring in his ear and noticed an item left in his shared inventory with Sachi. Once he took out the item, a recording crystal, he heard a message left to him by Sachi before her death, urging Kirito to survive. Oh my god, I was sad when this happened. I was just broken. The Black Swordsman. Upon encountering Silica in the Forest of Wandering, Kirito saved her from a party of attacking drunk apes. He apologized for being unable to save Pina, Silica's tamed monster, and told her that it was possible to revive Pina. After explaining the item needed and that she needed to come with him, Kirito gave her new equipment to supplement the level needed to clear the quest. After having dinner with her and showing her the location of the Numa flower, they slept and departed to the floor the next day. Kirito revealed that he was helping Silica because she reminded him of his sister, which when you think about it, I don't know what part of Silica reminded him of Suguha. Like when you really think about it, what part of Suguha did Silica remind him of? Oh my gosh. Anyway, the next day, they departed to the 47th floor to find the Numa flower on the Hill of Memories. On their way back after retrieving the flower, they were ambushed by Rosario and the Titan's Hand Guild. They attacked Kirito but were forced to surrender due to his higher level. Kirito revealed that he was looking for them because of a request from a leader of another guild, whose members were all killed with the exception of the leader by the Titan's Hand Guild. Kirito then threatened the bandits until they agreed to voluntarily go to the prison managed by the Aincrad Liberation Force. the Army. After returning to Floria, Kirito and Silica promise to meet again in the real world. A murder case in the area. On April 22, 2024, noticing the unusually favorable weather settings that morning, Kirito elected to take a quick nap in the fields right outside the Teleport Gate Plaza of the main city of the 59th floor. During his nap, the boy was found by Asuna, from whom he received an admonishment for not actively assisting the other players in clearing the labyrinth. Despite offering her to rest beside him, Kirito didn't actually expect to find the girl sleeping next to him when he woke 30 minutes later. Sensing her exhaustion, the swordsman decided to let her sleep, guarding her from player killers. When Asuna finally awoke over 8 hours later, the boy was offered a free meal as compensation for his consideration. Shortly after, they began eating a salad at a restaurant in Martin on the 57th floor. The duo suddenly heard a horrified scream from outside, prompting them to rush to the source. In the town square, they found an armored player hanging by his neck from a noose from a church's second-floor window, with a barbed short spear impaled into his chest, who seemingly died before anyone could help him. Convinced that the player had been killed in a duel, Kirito and Asuna quickly searched for a duel winner notice, but to no avail. Aware that the existence of a method to kill players within a safe zone would lead to panic, the two agreed to investigate the matter together. After retrieving the spear and the rope from within the church, Kirito and Asuna returned outside to the plaza where they found that a young woman named Yoko was the first person to witness the incident. Gently questioning her, they learned that the victim, named Keynes, was one of her former guildmates who had had dinner with her just before his murder. Having escorted Yoko to the nearest inn, the pair had other players spread news of the incident while they themselves investigated the rope and spear for any further leads on the killer. Since neither of them possessed an appraisal skill and Asuna's blacksmith friend would be occupied with business at the time, Kirito proposed to contact Egil for assistance. Having sent a message to Egil beforehand, Kirito traveled with Asuna to a shop in Algate on the 50th floor, where they had the shopkeeper examine the rope and spear with his appraisal skill. The duo learned that the spear, named Guilty Thorn, had been crafted by Grimlock, a player unknown to Egil. Although apprehensive of locating someone willing to create a weapon designed for player killing, Kirito and Asuna resolved to search for anyone on the middle floors who had been acquainted with Grimlock. Upon meeting with Yoko at 10 o'clock the following morning, Kirito and Asuna learned from her that Grimlock, Schmidt, and Yoko herself had once been part of the Golden Apple, a guild that had acquired a rare agility-boosting ring about half a year prior, yet subsequently collapsed when their guild leader, Griselda, was murdered for the ring shortly afterwards. Believing whoever killed Keynes was connected to Griselda's death, the two secured Yoko's stay at her inn for several days to keep her safe. Afterwards, Kirito suggested consulting with Heathcliff for advice on how to proceed with the investigation, due to his knowledge of Sword Art Online's mechanics. Warmth of the Heart. Around noon of June 25, 2024, due to Asuna's referral, Kirito visited Lisbeth Smith's shop and requested Lisbeth to create for him a sword that was on par with his Elucidator. When the blacksmith offered her best sword, he expressed his dissatisfaction with its light weight and decided to test its durability by striking it against Elucidator, accidentally shattering the former. Apologizing to an indignant Lisbeth for destroying her masterpiece, Kirito casually agreed to her demand to accompany him in gathering the materials to craft a weapon that would surpass his own blade. Thus, the two traveled to the West Mountain to obtain a crystallite ingot to forge what would eventually be known as Dark Repulsor. Also, another cute episode. Freaking Kirito and Lisbeth, very cute. Very cute. Honestly, comment down below which of the three would have been his waifu, had it not been Asuna. Would it have been Sachi, Lisbeth, or Silica? F it. We'll talk about all 5 potential waifus. Even Suguha, which I totally don't agree with, and Sinon. Let me know in the comments. Alright, next section. October 2024. After 2 years into SAO, Kirito was currently on the front lines, which were now located on the 74th floor on October 17th, 2024. As he left the labyrinth, Kirito found and killed a rag-out rabbit, the meat of which he later gave to Asuna to cook. He was then forced on a mapping run with Asuna. After defeating Kuradil, Asuna's bodyguard in a duel, the two departed for the labyrinth the next day on October 18th. Together, they found the boss room. While resting at a nearby safe zone, they encountered an elite unit of the Aincrad Liberation Force, the Army, whom Kirito and Asuna assumed would try to challenge the boss. They chased after them in case the platoon did something unreasonable, but the army platoon started fighting the boss before they could reach them. Kirito told them to teleport out, but one of the soldiers told him that their crystals wouldn't work in the boss room as it was an anti-crystal area. Upon arriving, Asuna impulsively ran in to help them, and Kirito quickly followed her. He was forced to activate his Dual Blade secret skill to save Asuna and the others. After the boss fight, word about Kirito's abilities spread throughout Aincrad. Asuna asked for a temporary leave of absence from her guild, and Heathcliff, the leader, said that he would only allow permission if Kirito defeated him in a duel. If Kirito lost, he would have to join the Knights of the Blood Guild. Kirito accepted the challenge and was on the verge of winning, but at the last moment, Heathcliff moved with impossible speed. The duel ended with Kirito's loss, forcing him to abide by their deal. He was given a Knights of the Blood outfit, and after a few days, sent to a mandatory training session with Kirito on October 23rd. After the latter killed Godfrey, the vanguard who wanted to see Kirito's skills, and revealed his plan to kill him, Asuna quickly came to Kirito's aid. After Kirito successfully feigned a surrender, he attacked Asuna after she lowered her rapier, and almost killed her. Kirito quickly intercepted, and though he lost his left arm in the process, he killed Kirito using the martial arts sword skill, Embracer. After this, Kirito announced his feelings for Asuna, and the two asked for another leave after the incident, which Heathcliff accepted. Afterwards, they stayed over at Asuna's house where Asuna made dinner, and Kirito was like, "Hey, can I sleep with you?" And misunderstandings ensue. The day before. After proposing to Asuna at 2100 on October 23, 2024, Kirito considered where to live quietly for their honeymoon. Thus, he recalled an isolated log house on the 22nd floor that he had encountered a year and a half prior, at a time when he had lacked the funds to purchase the estate. Wishing to spend his newlywed life with Asuna there, Kirito proposed the option to Asuna. The next day, past 1400 on October 24th, after sending messages to their friends and settling their request for a temporary withdrawal from the Knights of the Blood, Kirito and Asuna teleported to the 22nd floor. Morning Dew Girl. While Asuna and Kirito were on their honeymoon on the 22nd floor, they heard of a rumor of a ghost in the forest and decided to check it out on October 30th, 2024. In the forest, they found a young girl who went by the name of Yui, who they suspected was a traumatized player who had regressed into a baby. However, they were unable to find a color cursor on her, meaning she wasn't a player, NPC, nor monster. Despite this finding, they deduced that it was most likely that she was a player. After taking her to their home and reading the Lost and Found /Q&A section of the newspaper for possible people searching for this mysterious player with no luck, they decided to go to the town of Beginnings to find her parent/guardian, if they were still there. Upon their arrival at the town of Beginnings the next day on October 31st, they traveled around town in hopes of finding her parents and were eventually led to a nearby church, serving as an orphanage for kids who were trapped in SAO. Even here, there were no signs of Yui's parents. Then, on November 1st, they went to a hidden dungeon to save Thinker, the nominal leader of the Aincrad Liberation Force, who was trapped within its deepest levels. Yui watched Kirito easily handle the scavenge toads and was amazed by his fighting skills. After reaching the safe area in the dungeon, Kirito told Yulier to take Yui into the safe area. The safe area contained a GM module, and after touching it, Yui suddenly remembered what she was. As the boss, the Fatal Scythe, was about to deal the final blow on Kirito and Asuna, Yui went in front of them. To their shock, the boss's attack on her was deflected due to her immortal object status, and Yui defeated Fatal Scythe with the Object Eraser. The two discovered that Yui was actually a mental health counseling program and that the Cardinal system would delete her. When this happened, Kirito used the still active console to save her data into his nerve gear in the form of Yui's heart. Kirito and Asuna plan to recreate her as Yui once they escaped from SAO. November 2024. During the second week of their honeymoon, on November 6, 2024, Kirito and Asuna received a call. The boss room of the 75th floor had been found. They returned to the front lines the next day on November 7th and participated in the battle. During the battle, Kirito, Asuna, and Heathcliff managed to hold back the incredibly powerful boss while the rest of the players attacked. Afterwards, Kirito had an initiative realization. He first attacked Heathcliff, revealed his immortal object status, and concluded that Heathcliff was none other than Kayaba Akihiko himself. Kayaba lauded Kirito and announced that he would be waiting on the 100th floor as the final boss. A Knights of the Blood member attacked Heathcliff, prompting him to paralyze everyone in the room. After that, Heathcliff offered Kirito a chance at a 1-versus-1 duel, declaring that defeating him would clear the game, and the surviving players would be logged out of SAO. Kirito agreed despite Asuna's pleas to fall back. After a few minutes of fighting, Kirito became enraged and used a sword skill, and Kayaba, knowing the system all too well, took advantage of the post-motion delay to finish him off. However, Asuna intercepted the blow, despite her paralysis, and died from the attack. Kirito, filled with despair, attacked Kayaba thoughtlessly and was quickly struck down. Through a final push of his will before his body was deleted by the system, Kirito stabbed Heathcliff in the chest with Asuna's lambent light. Heathcliff and Kirito both vanished and were transported up to an area located above Aincrad, along with Asuna. Akihiko explained his reasons as for why he created SAO before vanishing along with his castle. During these final moments, Asuna and Kirito revealed their names, Yuki Asuna and Kirigaya Kazuto, to each other. After SAO was cleared and Kazuto woke up in a Tokyo hospital, he wandered off to find Asuna. After knowing Asuna's condition, he later attempted to return to the world of SAO via his nerve gear to find her, but the SAO servers had shut down. Fairy Dance Arc. The arc that I didn't really like. January 2025. 2 months after SAO was ended, Kazuto returned home to his family and had completed his rehabilitation, which allowed him to move freely again. Thus, he started to visit Asuna on occasion. During one of his such visits on January 19, 2025, Asuna's father, Yuki Shozo, and Sugo Nobuyuki came into the hospital room. After Nobuyuki was introduced, he told Asuna's father that he planned on having Asuna wear her bridal gown the next week. After Asuna's father's departure, he revealed his true nature and started stroking Asuna's hair while stating that he had the right to marry her, as he was in charge of maintaining the servers that hosted her conscience. He invited Kazuto to the wedding, leaving the boy helpless to do anything. That evening, Kazuto's sister, Suguha, found him alone in his room in a state of deep despair and self-loathing. After telling his sister that Asuna was out of his reach and how useless he felt, he began crying like a child in front of her. After closing the window, Suguha comforted her brother and encouraged him not to give up so easily, and then gently lowered him onto his bed, where a while later his cries ceased. When Kazuto awoke the next morning, January 20th, he found Suguha sleeping next to him in her pajamas. He then recalled what had happened the night before and, due to Suguha's encouragement, had renewed his resolve to save Asuna. Shortly after, he received an email from Eigo that contained a picture of a virtual world where a birdcage could be seen in the foreground. In that cage was a girl who looked exactly like Asuna. Kazuto immediately left to meet Andrew Gilbert Mills, Eigo, at the Dicey Cafe. There, he was shown a package for a new VR MMO game called ALfheim Online. After learning more about the game as well as the atmosphere, the successor of the nerve gear used to play the game, Kazuto discovered that the picture he had received earlier was taken inside of the game, at the top of the world tree. After noticing that the game was designed by Wrecked Progress Inc., and remembering that Nobuyuki, who worked there, said that he was in charge of the SAO servers, he realized that it could not have been just a coincidence. Thinking to himself that contacting the Ministry of Internal Affairs without concrete evidence was a bad idea, Kazuto asked Andrew to let him have the game client to personally confirm whether Asuna really was trapped in ALO. Upon returning home, Kazuto inserted the ALO client into his nerve gear and dove into the game. At the character creation screen, he inserted his character name and then continued to choose his character's race. Due to being pressed for time and not planning to play the game too seriously, he selected the Spriggan race because of the initial black-themed equipment rather than based on the race's strength and weaknesses. Kirito was then sent into a vortex of light and entered the game world, floating in the air above the Spriggan capital. However, while free-falling towards the Spriggan capital, a glitch occurred, and the area below Kirito collapsed into darkness. After a seemingly endless descent and landing on his face instead of his feet, he found himself in the ancient forest. Due to some bad feeling, Kirito tried to open the main menu and finally realized that commands in ALO were controlled with the left hand instead of the right hand as it was in SAO. Oh no, how different! It's controlled by the left hand. Yo, that would be so easy for me, I'm a left-hander. While the logout function was available and his HP and MP values were normal for a starting character, his avatar had over 8 skills already learnt, most of which were nearly or fully completed. However, those skills seemed strangely familiar to him, and he realized that all of the skills that he had were identical to his SAO skills, except his dual blade skills. Hoping to find more clues about what was happening, he checked his item window, only to find dozens of lines consisting of enigmatic numbers and characters. That being said, all the items that he had in SAO, though no longer usable, confirmed that his SAO save data was brought over to ALO for some reason. Realizing this, Kirito hoped that one specific item would be among the various unusable items, and soon found the item he was looking for, MHCP-001, in other words, Yui's heart. After he tapped the crystal twice, Yui appeared. After Yui checked the system, Kirito learned from her that the ALO server was a copy of the SAO servers, using the same graphics engine but an older version of the Cardinal system and different game components, and that the game used an almost identical save data and skill proficiency format to the one used in SAO, which was why he was able to inherit his skills with the exception of data denoting HP and MP. She also warned him that his items were corrupted and should be disposed of before the system's error detection protocol detected them. As for his abnormal skill values, Yui told Kirito that he should be fine unless a GM checked them directly. Kirito asked Yui what she was supposed to be in the game, and she took the form of a navigation pixie. Later, Kirito learned how to fly with a controller from her. Soon after, they found that some other players were approaching, one being chased by 3 others. Hearing that, Kirito decided to take a closer look at it and used his controller to fly to the scene of the battle. Once there, due to not having practiced landing, he crash-landed near the 3 salamanders and a sylph named Lifa, who the salamanders were hunting. While Lifa told Kirito to run away as she noticed that he was still using starting equipment, he only reproached the salamanders for ganging up on the girl, angering the salamanders. 2 of them moved in to sandwich him, but Kirito easily stopped the first strike and threw the salamander into his teammate, who was still airborne. After confirming with Lifa that it was alright to kill the salamanders, Kirito drew his sword and charged at one of the salamanders and killed him in one swing. The other salamander was mercilessly bisected shortly after. Looking up at the leader of the party, Kagemune, Kirito relaxed and asked whether he was going to fight as well, but Kagemune only smiled as he refused. As soon as Kagemune had flown away and the remain lights of the 2 other salamanders disappeared, Lifa asked the boy about what he expected her to do now, to which he responded by joking about her hugging him. Before Lifa was able to retaliate, Yui emerged out of Kirito's breast pocket, telling Lifa that she would only let Mama and herself stick to Papa. Kirito reacted by wrapping both of his hands around the pixie, not knowing how to explain what she was to Lifa, who then asked whether Yui was a private pixie, a prize of a lottery that took place at the launch of the game, which Kirito confirmed to cover Yui's true nature. Lifa, who had already loosened up after the encounter with Yui, then found out that Kirito got lost and decided to thank Kirito by treating him to a drink, which Kirito planned to use as an opportunity to find out more about ALO, especially about the World Tree. At Kirito's request, the duo decided to travel to the nearest town, Swilvane. Unfortunately, Kirito realized he still didn't know how to land and crashed into the Tower of Wind. At the city, after a brief encounter with Rekon, Kirito and Lifa entered an inn and a pub where they ordered their refreshments. Kirito then asked Lifa about the World Tree, as he wanted to get to the top of the tree and learned that it was the grand quest of ALO, as the first starting race to reach the top of the tree would be turned into the legendary race of Alfs, and that nobody had managed to complete this quest yet, even though the game had been online for a year now. Surprised by Kirito's determination to reach the top of the tree as soon as possible, no matter how difficult of a task it was, and seeing the familiar despair in his eyes despite his smile, Lifa volunteered to take him to the capital of ALfheim, Alne, where the entrance of the World Tree lay. As there was no method of instantaneous travel in ALO, they had to fly to the city, which would take hours. As Lifa had to log out already, they agreed to meet up again the next day, and Lifa told him that he can use the inn room to log out, as logging out instantly can only be done inside the player's home territory by using a tent or an inn if outside of the player's home territory. Puzzled by Lifa's actions, though grateful for her help, Kirito decided to follow her advice and use the inn room to log out. He fell asleep as he promised to Yui that, as soon as Asuna was safe, they would purchase a house in-game and live as a family again. As Kirito and Lifa left for the World Tree the next day on January 21st, under Lifa's advice, Kirito decided to buy some new equipment to replace his starting equipment. As a replacement for his beginner's sword, he purchased a sword as large as him, which, I'm gonna be honest, looked so stupid. I just wish he got 2 small swords again, but whatever. Both departed Swilvane by the Tower of Wind to gain an altitude boost. After fighting some aerial monsters, both eventually took a rest after their wings' flying time was depleted. They then decided to rotationally log out to have one of them protect the other's body while the other took a short break in the real world. Kirito and Lifa fought through many orcs while heading towards the neutral mining town of Legru. Hopefully that's pronounced right, it's been years since I've seen this part. As Lifa explained to Kirito about Spriggan magic, she also told him to remember the chanting, as it could save their lives one day. Yui detected many players coming behind them, and so both fairies hid in a gap in the wall, and Lifa cast a hidden spell to cover up the gap. After a short time of waiting, Kirito noticed a bat coming towards them, and Lifa realized that it was a high-level tracer. She quickly destroyed it and told him to run, stating that the bat was a fire attribute familiar, and therefore salamanders were pursuing them. As the two tried to reach Legru, the salamanders cast a high-level earth wall spell to block the entrance of the town. Kirito asked Lifa to act as support by healing him when he was hit while engaging the enemy head-on. The salamander party cornering them consisted of 3 tanks and 9 mages. Kirito tried to attack the tanks, dealing some damage, but 3 healer mages quickly healed them while the other 6 offense mages then cast offensive fire spells at Kirito, greatly injuring him. As the fight progressed, he tried to get close to the tanks and tried to remove their shields, but was forced to jump back after the mages cast another set of fireballs on him. As Lifa provided Kirito a magic protection shield by Yui's advice, Kirito transformed into a Gleam Eyes-like creature and easily ruined the salamander's formation, sparing one to interrogate. After being bribed by the items Kirito had received for killing the other salamanders, the mage told them why they had gone after the two. After the mage was given the items and happily left, Leafa wondered why Rekon was sending messages and under Kirito's advice, logged out. After logging back in, she told him what the problem was and that he should work for the salamanders, but he refused and decided to assist Leafa with her problem. After rushing past groups of orcs, they exited the caves and headed towards Butterfly Valley to try to stop the salamander attack force from killing leaders of Kate Shi, or if you're like 7-year-old me, Kate Sith, and Sylph that are going to sign treaties. As the leaders of the Lancers, Eugene, was about to order the Lancers to attack them, Kirito landed with a boom and expressed a wish to speak with the commander of the attack force. After Kirito told the commander that he was an ambassador to the Spriggan Undine Alliance, being there for trade reasons, and that the salamander attack would be considered a war declaration against the 4 races, Eugene thought that he was bluffing because of his gear and having no guards with him. Thus, Eugene challenged Kirito, which he accepts, and both began to fight. By taking advantage of his dual blades proficiency in SAO, as well as a smokescreen spell to surprise his opponent, he quickly defeated Eugene and left players who watched the battle in a state of shock at the fact that a Spriggan had managed to defeat the strongest player in ALO with weapons inferior to Eugene's demonic sword Gram that have magical ability. Under Kirito's request, Eugene was revived, and after being revived, he contemplated on Kirito's statement of the Spriggan Undine Alliance. Kagemune then came out from the salamander ranks and lied about Kirito having ties with an Undine, confirming this alliance. Thus, Eugene and his troops left on good terms as they didn't want to wage war on 4 races simultaneously. After the fight, the 2 leaders attempted to seduce Kirito into joining their respective army. However, he declines their offers, stating that he needed to get to the World Tree to see someone. As the alliance had just started and the group was low on money to buy gear, he gave them a large package of coins, each worth 100,000 Ird, which they gratefully accepted. He quickly left with Leafa and both flew towards Alne. After being notified by the system that maintenance was shutting the servers off for 3 hours, they decided to log off at an inn not too expensive, as Kirito was now broke. In the morning in the real world, Kazuto greeted Tsuguha and they decided to go to the hospital together. Kazuto then told his sister that the government plans to use a local school to hold the students from SAO. The 2 later arrived at the hospital where Asuna was being cared for. After the visit, they go back to ALfheim. While walking through a street of Alne, Yui told Kirito that Asuna was right above them. In a desperate act to reach her, he blasted off to the World Tree, hoping to find her there. As Kirito was flying towards the World Tree, Leafa tried to warn him of a barrier the admins had put after several players nearly managed to reach the top of the tree that way. He tried to attack the barrier but to no avail. Yui then used her warning mode to contact her, and Asuna eventually heard her voice. She then dropped an admin card, and Kirito caught the card, not knowing what it was, but knowing that Asuna had heard them. As Kirito went to the base of the World Tree to get to the top, 2 guardian statues blocked the door and asked if he was willing to challenge the Grand Quest. Kirito quickly accepted the challenge and ascended towards the top of the tree. As he flew upwards, multiple guardian knights spawned and tried to stop him. After killing several of them, he tried to speed up and reach the top, but got hit by a ranged guardian. More ranged guardians appeared and tried to stop him. However, he ignored the arrows and tried to get to the top. The melee guardians then started throwing their swords at Kirito, successfully hitting him and causing him to stop and bleed out from the damage, turning into a remain light. Kirito began to have doubts about his strength, having flashbacks from SAO. He was then rescued by Leafa, who revived him outside the World Tree. As he apologized to Leafa and told her that he needed to rescue Asuna, Leafa suddenly realized that Kirito was actually Kazuto and called him Big Brother. Kirito then realized that Leafa was actually Tsuguha, who logged out in disbelief. Kirito quickly logged out of the game and tried to comfort Tsuguha, but to no avail. Afterwards, Kazuto leaned against the door before falling in sorrow. After some thinking, Kazuto got back up and told Tsuguha that he would be waiting for her on the North Terrace of Alne. There, he was soon joined by Leafa, who proposed having a duel to express their feelings. During the battle, Leafa fell and let her sword go, intending to be slashed by Kirito, but instead, he caught her, shocking both of them. Kirito then told Leafa that he wanted to apologize to her, but he didn't know what to say and wanted her to have a free hit on him. After both quickly apologized to each other, they met up with Rekon, and the 3 began their second attempt on the World Tree. As Yui believed he could reach the top because of his speed, Kirito decided to play the role of attacker, while asking Rekon and Leafa to provide support as healers. Guardian Knights began to spawn again, and Kirito easily killed many of them, amazing Rekon in the process. As Kirito tried to reach the top, a large number of Guardians blocked him, and while healing Kirito, a few Guardians began to target Rekon and Leafa. Rekon quickly took some out, and then used the sacrifice spell to remove a large number of Guardians. Kirito then tried to get to the top again, but another large group of guardians blocked him, and they quickly refilled the gap caused by Rekon's sacrifice spell. The guardians began to charge towards Kirito, impaling him multiple times and prompting Lifa to heal him. As Lifa was about to be attacked, the Sylphs and a squad of Keiichi Dragoons arrived on time. They stated that they had come to help Kirito as they helped them with their preparations greatly earlier. The combined forces destroyed many guardians, and Lifa tossed her sword toward Kirito. Kirito then used the sword to wipe out many guardians with his slashing speed and ended up at the top of the world tree. As Kirito tried to open the door, he was unable to because, as Yui told, the door wasn't locked by the quest, but by admins instead. As the guardians spawned and surrounded him, he suddenly remembered about the admin card Asuna had dropped to him earlier. He gave it to Yui, who transferred the code to open the door, reaching the upper levels of the world tree. As Yui and Kirito explored the area, Kirito realized that the floating city atop the world tree had been a lie along with the quest. Yui then found Asuna's location and, after they reached the location, removed the gates, allowing Kirito and Asuna to meet again. Kirito suddenly drew his sword as he sensed an enemy coming, and Yui disappeared. The scene then transformed into a black void, and Oberon appeared, binding them both with gravity magic. Oberon then stabbed Kirito with his sword and then set the pain absorption level to 8, causing Kirito to feel some of the pain. As Kirito helplessly watched Oberon abuse Asuna, Kayaba appeared and told him to rethink the fact that human will could overcome the system and give him his admin ID and password. Kirito then came to his senses and got back up. When Oberon tried to kick him back down, Kirito stopped the blow midway and accessed Kayaba's ID, Heathcliff, and then revoked Oberon's admin privileges. Enraged, Oberon tried to spawn Excalibur, but the system ignored his request. Kirito then repeated the same command to spawn one, and gave it to him while setting the pain absorption level to 0, which made Oberon panic. Also, the pain absorption level being 0 means that he feels all of the pain. Kirito then told him not to run, as Kayaba had never run from him during their fight. Oberon cursed Kayaba for interfering with him even after his death. Kayaba! And he tried to attack Kirito, but Kirito parried his attacks with no effort and then quickly sliced and dismembered him, which caused Oberon to tremble from the pain and tossed him up to stab him in the right eye, killing him and then freeing Asuna. Kirito then logged Asuna out, and after he was the only one left, Kayaba came out and talked with him again. Kayaba gave Kirito the seed and then told him he could do whatever he wanted with it. He then disappeared, and Kirito called for Yui and promised her that the two would come back to ALfheim and start again. Kirito quickly logged out to the real world, where he was met by Suguha, who was worried about him. At that moment, he informed Suguha that Asuna was back in the real world, and Suguha let him go to the hospital so that he could meet her again, which he quickly agreed to. He got his bike and started riding towards the hospital where Asuna was being taken care of. As Kazuto ran towards the entrance of the hospital, he was cut by an attacker. He then realized that his right arm was bleeding, and identified his attacker as Nobuyuki, who, despite being in a lot of pain, declared his intent to kill him. As Kazuto was unable to defend himself from Nobuyuki because of his bleeding arm, Nobuyuki tried to kill him, missed because of his vision being blurry because of, getting stabbed in the right eye. As Nobuyuki tried to perform the finishing blow again, Kazuto's thoughts of Asuna gave him the willpower to stop Nobuyuki and disarm him. Kazuto then smashed Nobuyuki's face into a van and put the knife to his neck. Thinking of all the things Nobuyuki had done to him and Asuna, Kazuto almost killed him, but in the end, let him live. Kazuto headed towards the hospital, where he reported Nobuyuki and got some of his wounds treated, before grabbing a guest card so he could go to Asuna's room. He then met Asuna for the first time in real life, and, hugging each other, they shared a kiss. Without all the BS that happens in ALO, I would actually love the arc, but it's just so rushed, and they made Asuna just like a damsel in distress. Because friggin' that kiss they share after not being able to see each other for months, really. It's kind of like, it's kind of cathartic. May 2025. Months later, in school, Kazuto had just finished the class and headed outside to meet up with Asuna. Kazuto told her about all the recent news, also mentioning the arrest of Nobuyuki and the end of his inhumane experiments. After a while of chatting, Kazuto quickly spaced out while thinking about Kayaba and the fact that he gave him the seed. After Asuna got Kazuto out of his train of thoughts, and the two enjoyed sandwiches Asuna had made for lunch. After school, the two and Suguha head towards the Dicey Cafe to attend the Aincrad capture commemorative party. As they opened the doors to the cafe, they were surprised that everyone was already there. Shortly afterwards, everyone congratulated Kazuto for completing SAO. Kazuto then went to the bar, where he was then joined by Ryutaro, Thinker, and Andrew. Andrew showed the progress of the seed to the three. Kazuto later logged into ALO, which was now owned by a new company, to bring Lifa to the after party. After he caught her falling from the sky, Leafa asked him to dance with her. Later, Kirito grabbed Leafa's hand and took her near the World Tree, where he showed Leafa the floating castle New Aincrad, and told her that they were going to clear all 100 floors this time. More players showed up, heading towards New Aincrad, and Kirito muttered something that surprised Leafa and Asuna before encouraging them to start moving. And thus ends the Fairy Dance arc. Honestly, I don't know how I feel about them bringing New Aincrad back. I feel like if you were part of SAO, you would have like major PTSD and not ever want to play a VR MMO ever again. And the fact that they bring back Aincrad, it's just like, holy crap, I gotta do this again, but this time without the dying, I still don't think I can handle that. Anyway, let's move on to the next section before I start going on rant. Sword Art Online Extra Edition. The episode begins with Kazuto and Tsukuha arriving at the SAO Survivor School on his motorbike. After meeting up with Asuna, Rika, and Keiko, Kazuto leaves to attend emergency counseling, while the girls head off to use the changing rooms to change into their swimsuits. Kazuto arrives at the office to find the counselor and Kikuoka Seijiro waiting for him, where the latter reveals that the emergency counseling was just a ruse to get Kazuto to meet with him. The counselor then leaves and Kikuoka dumps a pile of snacks and a recorder onto the table to discuss Kazuto's experiences in SAO in order to determine the reasons for Kayaba Akihiko's actions. While the girls compare their swimsuits' respective styles in the locker room, Kazuto starts explaining when Akihiko first announced the true nature of Sword Art Online, to create a setting for a death game. Kazuto continues to explain his experience within Sword Art Online and the events which followed in ALfheim Online. His meeting with Seijiro comes to a close when the latter tells him that he knew the rest of the story. That evening in ALO, Kirito and Klein were sitting on the beach whilst the girls played in the water. Phantom Bullet Arc. On December 7th, 2025, Kazuto was called by Kikuoka Seijiro, the man in charge of Net Crimes Division, to a pastry shop to chat. Kazuto learned about the GGO players found dead in their homes, as well as the player calling himself Death Gun, who harassed them prior to their disconnection from the game. After hearing about the potential threat to MMO game security, Kazuto agreed to investigate GGO for a fee, and notified Asuna of his decision to convert his avatar, though he kept the reason a secret. 6 days later, a hospital room was set up for Kazuto to full dive in, with Aki Natsuki, the nurse who had taken care of him during the SAO incident, assigned to observe him for any abnormalities in his condition during the dives. Upon entering GGO at the hospital, Kirito was stunned at the extremely feminine appearance of his avatar. Though initially disappointed and discomforted at its lack of intimidation and aggressive aura, Kirito determined it would still help him be conspicuous among the players of GGO and attract Death Gun's attention. Having become lost while trying to find the location where registration for the Bullet of Bullets was being held, Kirito attempted to ask another player for directions. Upon realizing that the person was female, he became concerned that the girl would think he was just flirting with her, rather than being genuinely lost. However, being mistaken for a girl due to his appearance, Kirito was instead offered her assistance. Kirito decided to make use of the misunderstanding and inquired on the location of the administrative office and an equipment store. As the girl was heading for the administrative building as well, Kirito was escorted to the marketplace along the way. At the marketplace, the two realized that Kirito had starter funds after his conversion. When Sinon, the girl, offered to lend some credits, Kirito declined the offer due to guilt and instead inquired about gambling within GGO as a way to quickly earn money. Thus, he was directed to the bullet dodging game named Untouchable, the objective of which is to get as close to an NPC cowboy gunman as possible while dodging his gunfire. After learning the mechanics of bullet lines from Sinon, Kirito decided to try the game himself. Using his previous experience with NPC targeting, he managed to evade the cowboy's shots by following his eyes and touch the NPC's chest, winning the jackpot. Also, Kirito, why are you going around touching chests, bro? Why are you doing that? Anyway, Kirito used all his funds in buying a photon sword, a Kagemitsu G4 in FN57, and some equipment to participate in the third Bullet of Bullets event. After a rush through the city, he and Sinon entered the tournament. During the tournament, Kirito used an original battle style of deflecting incoming bullets with his sword. Kirito and Sinon managed to get into the finals held the next day, although Kirito was shocked by his encounter with Death Gun. The next day, Kazuto was confronted by Tsukuha, who discovered that he was mentioned in a video game's news site as one of the participants of the Bullet of Bullets tournament. Kazuto waited for the afternoon to head to the hospital. Before he logged into GGO, he shared his guilt of having killed 3 Laughing Coffin members to stop them from harming others and then forcefully forgetting about their deaths. In response, he was comforted by Natsuki, who reminded him of his right to save others and himself. Upon entering the game, he saw Sinon and asked her to tell him more about the finals. In the tournament finals, while trailing Pale Rider by hiding underwater, he was able to avoid satellite scan and thus unintentionally stuck up on Sinon. He and Sinon then witnessed Death Gun dispatching Pale Rider despite their efforts to stop him. Afterwards, they trailed Deathgun to the central city on the stage, where Kirito took out Musketeer X, mistaking her for Deathgun, and returned just in time to save Sinon from the real Deathgun, who had been hiding with a metamaterial optical camouflage mantle. They managed to escape and hid in the desert, where Sinon told him her past, which Kirito responded by comforting her. Funny enough, I remember this part as the episodes where they just stayed in a cave. They stayed in a cave for so long, man. After talking for a while, they figured out the secret behind Deathgun. He attained the addresses of some of the players by using his mantle to peep on them while they were using the in-game terminals and inputting personal details. His accomplice would then kill the selected targets in the real world by injecting a lethal dose of a drug. Realizing this, Kirito and Sinon prepared a plan to defeat Deathgun using Kirito as bait. Initiating their plan, Kirito stepped out of the cave while Sinon prepared her equipment. Trusting Sinon to take care of their opponent, Yamikaze, Kirito focused on sensing for Deathgun's location. After Sinon defeated Yamikaze and destroyed Deathgun's sniping equipment, Kirito engaged him in battle, in which Kirito discovered the identity of his opponent. During the battle, Kirito had a difficult time gaining the upper hand. However, he later sensed Asuna's hand, which reminded him of the existence of his pistol, which he then used to imitate the double circular sword skill with the gun and his sword, finally killing Deathgun. Once they were the only two competitors left, Kirito and Sinon exchanged personal details and planned what to do next. The tournament then ended when Sinon used the gift grenade to have them both killed at the same time, thus ending the tournament as a tie. After logging out, Kirito hurried over to Shino's house and arrived just in time to save her from Deathgun's first accomplice. 2 days later, he visited Shino's school and took her to meet Seijiro. After discussing the recent incident, he brought her to the Dicey Cafe where they met with Asuna and Rika, as well as a woman Shino had saved during the incident in the post office. Calibur. At 9:30 in the morning on December 28, 2025, Kazuto was shown by Sugaha an article detailing the discovery of the Holy Sword Excalibur. As the weapon had not actually been acquired yet, Kazuto resolved to retrieve the blade before anyone else and thus gathered Asuna, Keiko, Rika, Ryutaro, and Shino for an expedition to Jotunheim. Mother's Rosario. After seeing both Lisbeth and Lifa relatively easily defeated by Absolute Sword Yuki, Kirito decided to try dueling her himself using only a single sword. Kirito was assaulted with a high-speed attack and lost the duel. Kirito later appeared in front of the 27th floor boss room to prevent the large guild from interfering with the Sleeping Knight's attempt at beating the floor boss. As the guild attempted to launch various spells at him, Kirito revealed his outside system skill, Spell Blast, using sword skills to strike the center of the incoming spells to neutralize them. He then drew his second sword, the Holy Sword Excalibur, to distract the guild long enough for the Sleeping Knights to enter the boss room. He, along with Klein, held off the guild for 3 minutes before succumbing to the overwhelming numbers. Sometime later, he faced against Yuki in the ALO duel tournament finals using only a single sword, but ended up losing again. Yo, Kirito, maybe you're not the fastest anymore, bro. Ordinal Scale. In the year 2026, the Ogma is released to the public as an alternative system to the Atmosphere, as it projects a game layer on top of reality while the player is conscious rather than using full dive, otherwise known as augmented reality, which we have in real world. The most prominent combat-based game is Ordinal Scale, in which a player's abilities are ranked by ordinal numbers, whatever that means. Asuna, Lisbeth, and Silica encourage Kirito to play Ordinal Scale upon hearing the Aincrad bosses have appeared. Kirito joins Asuna and Klein in a boss fight against Kagachi, the Samurai Lord at Akihabara, where the game's mascot, AI idol singer Yuna, appears and gives players buff effects as she sings. Kirito fails to achieve anything due to his lack of real-world physical strength and agility. Eiji, the number 2 ranked player, aids the group in defeating the boss. Before Asuna makes the killing blow, Eiji whispers the word switch, a game mechanic from SAO that she recognizes. The next night, Asuna joins Klein and his group for another boss fight at Yoyogi Park while waiting for their last group member, unaware that he was injured by Eiji the night before. Asuna leaves Klein and his guild behind and proceeds to fight against the Storm Griffin, which is again presided over by Yuna. Klein and his guild are surprised by the sudden appearance of a second boss, Zanghi the Flame Caller, and shockingly supported by Eiji, who physically attacks and defeats Klein and his entire guild in the real world using superior reflexes and seemingly superhuman strength. When Asuna returns to where she left them, Klein and his guild are nowhere to be seen. The following morning, as Kirito practices with Ordinal Scale in Yoyogi Park, a girl he doesn't know appears in a white hood, mouths something wordlessly, and points off into the distance before disappearing. How freaky is that? If that ever happened to me at a park alone, I would be freaked out. A confused Kirito is surprised by Asuna, who's arrived to have lunch with him. While eating together, Asuna theorizes that Eiji was a former member of the Knights of the Blood Oath named Nautilus, while Yui deduces that the spawn locations of the Aincrad bosses line up with the SAO dungeon maps. Noting the absence of Klein, Kirito tries to check up on him. Asuna, Lisbeth, and Silica join the boss fight against Strict Hermit at Yebisu Garden Place, where Yuna and Eiji appear again. At the same time, Egil contacts Kirito and tells him that Klein has been hospitalized with a broken arm. Kirito, alarmed, rushes to protect Asuna and their friends. During the boss battle, a second boss, Dorzel, the Chaos Drake, suddenly appears and fixates on Silica. Eiji blocks Silica's escape by pushing her into the path of a lethal boss attack, and Asuna is defeated while protecting her. An orange orb materializes from Asuna and is quickly collected by one of the Ordinal Scale drones. After the battle, Asuna begins to suffer memory loss and goes to the hospital for examination. Asuna learns that the Ogma device scanned her brain specifically for SAO memories and that the memory loss could worsen. After Asuna's condition worsens, Kirito gains a strong resolve to solve the mystery. Kirito visits Klein in the hospital and confirms that Klein's SAO memories are also missing. Kirito goes to the Dire Tusk boss battle at Tokyo Dome City looking for Eiji, where he's joined by Sinon. Although he's concerned for her safety, Sinon reminds Kirito that she's not an SAO survivor. During the boss battle, an SAO survivor is defeated, and Kirito witnesses a glowing memory orb being collected by an Ordinal Scale drone. Yui tries to retrieve the memory orb from the drone but fails after being blocked by the Ordinal Scale system. After the battle, Kirito is frustrated that Eiji didn't show up, but meets the hooded girl a third time, who repeats her actions from before. Kirito and Yui figure out that she's pointing towards Toto Technical University. Kirito goes to the university and meets Professor Tetsuhiro Shigemura, who developed Ogma. Shigemura refuses to answer any questions. Before leaving, Kirito notices on Shigemura's desk a picture of a girl who resembles Yuna. Kirito talks to Kikuoka Seijiro, who informs him that Shigemura's daughter, Yuna, died in SAO. Kirito warns Kikuoka that the memory loss may be affecting other SAO survivors playing Ordinal Scale. Visiting Asuna's home, Kirito promises Asuna that he will get her memories back. While searching for clues, Kirito encounters the hooded girl yet again, who he confirms is Yuna. When she tells him his rank is too low, Kirito decides to level up hardcore, recklessly chain-soloing as many bosses as he can and improving his AR swordsmanship with help from Lifa, or Suguha. Days later, the OS players gather at the Tokyo National Stadium for Yuna's first live concert. In the lower levels, Kirito duels with Eiji, who claims he has a way to return Asuna's memories. After Kirito defeats him, Eiji reveals that Shigemura had been harvesting memories of SAO players in an attempt to reconstruct his lost daughter's soul and resurrect her as an AI. Having SAO survivors concentrated in one place is the final stage of the plan, and Eiji believes he has won. Kirito rushes back upstairs to warn everyone, calling Kikuoka on the way. Kikuoka warns Kirito that all the memory harvesting drones scanning everyone at once could damage the players' brains, killing them like the Nerve Gear did in SAO. As a horde of Aincrad bosses appear and terrorize the stadium, Kirito and Yuna join the battle. Yuna tells Kirito that the Ogma has a hidden full dive feature, and he can use it to defeat SAO's 100th floor boss to stop the scan and save everyone. Before diving, Kirito gives Asuna an engagement ring. Entering the Ruby Palace of Floor 100, Kirito, Lisbeth, Silica, Egil, and Sinon confront the boss. They're easily overwhelmed until Asuna, Lifa, Klein, and several other memorable players from ALO and GGO come to their aid. Yui restores their saved abilities from SAO, allowing everyone to defeat the boss. The voice of Akihiko Kayaba congratulates them on their victory and gives Kirito an extremely powerful sword as a reward. The group returns to the arena still in full dive, where Kirito, now Ordinal Scale's top-ranked player, effortlessly dispatches the bosses with his new sword. Meanwhile, in the real world, Kikuoka finds Shigemura in the abandoned server room of Argus, the defunct company that once ran SAO, and arrests him. The hooded Yuna restores the survivor's memories and fades out of existence since her existence was tied to that of the Floor 100 boss. Afterwards, Kirito and Asuna fulfill the promise they made to each other in Aincrad to watch a meteor shower together. Asuna returns Kirito's promise rings so he can properly put it on her hand this time, which he does. In a post-credit scene, Kikuoka, who is impressed with Shigemura's attempt at AI and soul reconstruction, recruits Shigemura to Wrath. Alicization Arc. Recruited by Kikuoka for an experiment with a new form of VR system developed by the mysterious company Wrath, Kirito awoke in a fantasy-style forest with no memory of how he got there. There, he met a teenage woodcutter named Yujio, who seemed too lifelike to be an NPC. Alicization Beginning. Kazuto met Shino at the Dicey Cafe, where they talked while waiting for Asuna to arrive. When she arrived, they showed Shino that Asuna was able to monitor Kazuto's pulse via the monitor he had implanted for his part-time job. They proceed to talk about Kazuto's part-time job, which involved full diving using a new generation full dive machine. After Kazuto's long explanation about the theory of the new generation device, they departed and Kazuto insisted to accompany Asuna to her house. But just before arriving, he noticed that they were being followed and faced the stalker, Kanemoto Atsushi, aka Johnny Black. He defended Asuna but was injected with a drug and was later taken in an ambulance. Although Kazuto managed to survive, he suffered severe brain damage. Secretly, Kazuto's body was intercepted by Kikuoka Seijiro as he was supposedly being transferred to a different hospital. Kazuto's body was taken to the Ocean Turtle, where he was connected to the Soul Translator to treat his damaged neural pathways. Kirito awoke in a forest in an unknown place, wondering where he was. He heard a strange noise, and at the source of the noise, he met a boy called Yujio, who explained to him the basics of the world and took him to his hometown, Rulid Village. In the town, he met other people and decided to stay there. Kirito unintentionally caused Selka Zuberg to run into a certain cave and get captured, causing Kirito and Yujio to go after her. They defeated the goblins, but Yujio was heavily wounded. Kirito awakened Selka, who was lying in a cart, and Selka, with Kirito's assistance, saves Yujio. They all returned to the village. Yujio finished his current sacred task and chose his next, to be a swordsman. Alicization Running. Several months had passed since Kirito and Yujio had left Rulid Village and had been working as stable boys for a family of farmers. On the 20th day of the 8th month, they participated in the Zakaria Sword Arts tournament, where he faced Egomi Zakarite, a 6th class noble who used a stronger sword to have an advantage against Kirito, but the latter used his snakebite sword skill to break Egomi's sword and win. Months later, he, along with Yujio, enrolled in the Norlangarth Swordmaster Academy and became valets for the elite swordsmen. One day, Kirito was training with his mentor, Sortalina Surlet, and after the practice, he returned to his dorm and spoke to Yujio, who reminded him that the next day, after a complete year, he would receive the sword that was carved from the branch of the Gigas Cedar. When he returned to the academy with his new sword, he practiced his sword skills to show them to Sortalina later, but when he attempted to perform a 5-hit sword skill in the forest to challenge the limit of his new sword in secret, he lost control and stained the shirt of Volo Levantine, the head elite swordsman who was watching him, with mud. As punishment, he had to spar with Volo, who tried to win in one hit as always, but Kirito stopped him with the 4 hits of vertical square. A supervisor intervened and declared a tie, thus ending the duel. Alicization Turning. Kirito had become an elite swordsman in the academy, and thus he now had a valet. 1.5 months in the new school year, on the 17th of the 5th month, he entered his and Yujio's room from the window with a bag of honey pies, took a pair for Yujio and himself, and gave the rest to their respective valets, Tish Stolinen and Ronye Arabel. Yujio reminded him that they have a test on sacred arts that he wasn't good at yet, so he stayed in his room studying while Yujio practiced. Days later, he went to a picnic with Yujio and their valets, where the latter revealed to Kirito and Yujio of Humbert Zizek's mistreatment of Frenikazeski, his valet. Since Yujio was flustered, Kirito accompanied him to Raios Antinous and Humbert's room to discuss the matter with them. The nobles played dumb, and the matter was left as such. Days later, Kirito was maintaining his sword with Yujio, and both were waiting for their valets to arrive. They became worried when it turned out that their valets were running late, and Kirito decided to look for them, exiting through the window. When he returned to his room, Frenica informed him that Ronye, Tias, and Yujio were in Raios and Humbert's room. He arrived at the scene just in time to stop Raios from killing Yujio. As they faced each other, he inexplicably transformed his sword from a one-handed to a two-handed one and used Whirl Current to beat him, and at the same time, cutting his arms off. Kirito and Yujio were arrested for breaking the Taboo Index and were given into custody of an Integrity Knight. Upon discovery, it was Alice, their long-lost best friend. They were then taken to the prison under the Central Cathedral by Alice. They managed to escape from the prison and arrive at the courtyard of the cathedral, where they faced the Integrity Knight Eldri Synthesis 31. After an intense battle, Yujio recalled that Eldri was the winner of the Four Empires Unity tournament held the previous month. Noticing that this revelation could highlight some peculiarities in Eldri's memory, Kirito joined Yujio in awakening Eldri's memory, which caused the knight to enter a state of shock. As more and more of Eldri's life details were revealed, a purple prism began to protrude out of Eldri's forehead. However, at this point, another Integrity Knight attacked the youngsters by firing arrows at them with a bow from atop a flying dragon. Kirito and Yujio then began to retreat into the cathedral's garden while getting directions from Charlotte, pulling Kirito's hair in a certain direction at every crossroad. Once they arrived at what seemed to be a dead end, they were called by a young-looking girl to escape through a door which Kirito had not noticed before. Thus, they entered the great library room where the girl introduced herself as Cardinal. In the library, he was separated from Yujio by Cardinal for her to tell him her story and what had happened in Underworld before requesting his help to overthrow Quinella. Alicization Rising. After Cardinal finished her story, he said that he wanted to save her and the people of Underworld. After reuniting with Yu-Gi-Oh, Cardinal helped the two swordsmen create their own armament full control arts before the two headed out into the central cathedral again. Once they were back in the central cathedral, they made their way to the equipment vault where the blue rose sword and Kirito's black sword were being kept. Upon finding their swords, they were then found by Dusselbert, whom they then fought against and defeated. After Dusselbert was defeated, he asked them to kill him, as he had failed his task, and therefore he would be punished accordingly. However, they rejected his request until Yu-Gi-Oh heard the knight's name and remembered that he was the one that took Alice away. Yu-Gi-Oh then wanted to harm him, however he was then stopped by Kirito. They then continued on their way up to the top of the cathedral. On the way to the 29th floor, they met Faisal and Linnell, who claimed to be sister apprentices, which was soon proven to be false, as the girls paralyzed Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh with poisoned daggers, while revealing that they were in fact Integrity Knights. The girls then made their way up to the 50th floor, dragging the paralyzed duo with them so that they could be executed in front of the other Integrity Knights. Once they reached the 50th floor, it was revealed that Kirito had determined that the girls were lying before they paralyzed Yu-Gi-Oh and himself, and noticed that they were carrying blades made from poisoned steel from Ruberyl. So while Yu-Gi-Oh was chatting with them, he had chanted an antidote sacred art to counter the effects of the poison. He paralyzed both Faisal and Linnell, and then requested to battle with Fanatio Synthesis 2 in an individual duel. However, Fanatio declined the offer, thus Kirito was forced to fight 4 other Integrity Knights while Fanatio recited her armament full control art. Kirito defeated the 4 Integrity Knights and leaped at Fanatio with Sonic Leap. However, as he reached the peak of his jump, she finished her armament full control art, which upset the trajectory of Kirito's secret move as it hit him with a powerful ray of light. Kirito continued to defend against Fanatio, and after getting an upper hand, he found out that Fanatio was a woman. Yu-Gi-Oh took a hand in the fight and used his Blue Rose Sword's armament full control art to freeze Fanatio. Even though Fanatio was frozen for a few moments, she broke through the ice with her heaven-piercing sword. She activated her armament full control art once again, which Kirito countered with his own armament full control art. Due to the fight, Fanatio was mortally wounded, so Kirito decided to use the dagger which Cardinal had given to him to use on Administrator on Fanatio to save her life. After Cardinal took Fanatio to save her, Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh made their way past the door that the knights were guarding, where, instead of stairs, they found the cathedral's equivalent of an elevator and met a young girl who was known by the name Elevating Operator. She took Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh to the 80th floor where they met Alice, sitting in the cloud-top garden waiting for them. Alice spoke to the two boys, telling them that she had thought Eldry would be sufficient to cope with the two prisoners in the off chance that they escaped. However, they had surprised her by defeating him, as well as Dusselbert and Fanatio, who possessed divine objects. Alice placed her hand on the tree, stating that she would have to fight them, and her fragrant olive sword appeared in her hand, revealing that the tree was her sword in its original form. As Kirito began to attack, the fragrant olive sword split into several petals, capable of killing with ease. Kirito suggested a fair fight, and Alice agreed. Kirito attacked in hopes of surpassing the knight with chained attacks, but failed. Due to the fragrant olive sword's high level of priority, Kirito could only defend himself until Yu-Gi-Oh intervened and froze Alice. Alice broke herself free, but before she could reassemble her sword, Kirito unleashed his armament full control against her sword to keep Alice occupied while Yu-Gi-Oh used Cardinal's dagger. However, the clash between the two armament full control arts resulted in a torrent that struck the supposedly indestructible wall and created a hole, which sucked Kirito and Alice out of the central cathedral. Alicization Dividing. After falling out of the Central Cathedral's 80th floor, Kirito managed to stab his sword into a small gap in the Central Cathedral's outer wall and was now hanging on his sword while holding onto Alice's Synthesis 30 with his other arm. With a bit of persuasion, he managed to convince her to form a temporary truce and work together to survive until they could return inside the cathedral. Alice then stabbed her sword and created a chain out of her right gauntlet, which they used to tie themselves together in case one of them fell. During their conversation, he asked Alice whether there was any way to re-enter the cathedral from the outside of the higher floors. After finding out that they could enter the cathedral through the Morningstar lookout on the 95th floor, Kirito thought up of climbing the cathedral using pitons he created from metal elements, using sacred arts as platforms. By repeatedly going through the process of generating metallic elements, changing them into pitons, stabbing it into the wall, getting himself up onto it, and pulling Alice up to the piton he previously stood on using the chain quite some time, and getting to about the 85th floor, Kirito spotted grotesque stone statues on a pavement jutting out from the wall a few meters ahead. As night had already fallen, thus the sun no longer provided the sacred power needed for sacred arts, Kirito had run out of pitons due to the limited resources around, and thus Alice made 3 out of her left gauntlet. At 4 meters to the pavement, Kirito realized the statues weren't statues, but were instead recognized as minions, underlings created by using dark arts by Alice. Kirito noticed that the pavement was 4 meters away, while the chain was 5 meters long. He grabbed the chain and hurled Alice onto the pavement and was shortly afterwards pulled up by Alice in a similar fashion. Together, they manage to fend off the minions, both being impressed by each other's skills. Kirito then wonders what they should do while they waited for the moon to rise in a few hours and provide them with resources to continue climbing. In a bitter tone, she stated it was foolish of him to be optimistic in the situation they were in. He replied that it was still possible to create more pitons, which he carefully referred to as wedges to climb, and mentioned that he was hungry. While praising Alice's ability in sacred arts, he accidentally mentioned that she was Selka's elder sister, which caused Alice to immediately grab his nape to interrogate him. After thinking hard for several seconds, Kirito decided to reveal the truth to Alice that she had a little sister, and said that he was willing to tell her everything he believed to be the truth, though whether she would choose to believe him or not was her choice. After several seconds had passed, she abruptly released his coat's nape, ordering him to talk. She stated that if she found any of his words to be lies, he would be cut down then and there. Agreeing to her terms, Kirito started with the duty of the Integrity Knights and how they came to be. He mentioned that the only ones who believed that the Integrity Knights were existences summoned by the goddess's messengers, the highest minister of the Axiom Church, from the celestial world to preserve the order and justice, were the Integrity Knights alone, stating that there was not a single Integrity Knight that was never once a human. He also voiced that the one who had sealed away their memories was not the goddess Stacia, as what Integrity Knights were told, but instead the administrator Quinella herself, while referencing that Eldri Woolsburg, Alice's disciple, didn't collapse because he was cut by either Yu-Gi-Oh or Kirito himself, but because the memories of his mother were stimulated, though he was unable to recall anything. Shaking her head left and right like a child to reject the notion that Eldri was born of depraved upper-class nobles, Alice dismissed his claims as ridiculous. Kirito refuted the depravity nobles hold was caused by the high social position and numerous privileges granted to them by the Axiom Church in the first place. He continued by saying that the memories of Integrity Knights were not only fiddled with during the synthesis ritual, but also after becoming knights. Alice agreed that she brought Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh to the church from the Sword Mastery Academy by a flying dragon, and that they were the first criminals she was ever commanded to bring in. Kirito responded that Integrity Knight Dusselbert Synthesis 7 had no memories about the fact that he had brought the young Alice with his own hands from Rulid Village in the northern outskirts of the church. He restated that half of the knights were tournament champions, adding that the remaining half were humans brought to the cathedral as criminals. People who possessed a will firm enough to oppose the Taboo Index would possess unmatched power when turned into Integrity Knights. Thus, the administrator could kill two birds with one stone. Finally, he told Alice that her real name was Alex Zuberg. Kirito told Alice about her past. With a barely audible voice, Alice stated that she was unable to recall anything. Her faltering voice eventually turned into a feeble sob. Void of his realization, tears formed in Kirito's eyes as well. Noticing them, he gathered his resolve to defeat Administrator and bring Alice back to her hometown. Kirito then thought of the ideal outcome. They would continue to climb the tower and enter it via the 95th floor, somehow avoid fighting Alice and reunite with Yu-Gi-Oh, whether they would use the dagger given to them by Cardinal on Alice depending on the situation, then either defeat or convince Integrity Knight Berkuli Synthesis 1, charge to the top floor of the cathedral, render the sleeping administrator powerless, find Alice's memory fragment, and return her memories and personality. Finally, Kirito would establish contact with Wrath to prevent the invasion from the Dark Territory. Alice told him she had yet to believe him, even though she did admit that she could not deny the fact that minions from the Dark Territory were positioned on the tower's walls. The fact that Integrity Knights are humans, but on the other hand, she could also not deny the fact that the main order given to the Integrity Knights was to protect the borders of the human empire. When Kirito was thinking about how the administrator had taken away the chance of humans to fight back, his thoughts were interrupted by Alice's question of whether the two of them were planning to single-handedly battle against all the invaders from the Land of Darkness, if they could manage to defeat the administrator. He answered the still teary-eyed girl with another question, asking her if the Integrity Knight Order could undoubtedly defeat the invaders themselves, which caused her to be at a loss for words. After a few moments of silence, Alice admitted that even Knight Commander Berkuli, whom she briefly referred to as Uncle, held the same worry in his heart. But in the end, the upper-class nobles who practice swordsmanship and sacred arts concentrate solely on the beauty of a single strike, which would most likely be useless in actual combat, meaning that their only option was for the Integrity Knights to battle on their flying dragons, trusting in divine protection from the three goddesses. Alice then asked Kirito if he understood the situation. Still facing forward, Kirito agreed to her statement, but he also remarked that the situation was brought upon by the administrator herself. Hearing no rebuttal from the Golden Knight beside him, he continued by stating that if the administrator had believed in the people earlier on, an army comparable to the forces of darkness would be in existence, but she allowed the upper-class nobles to indulge in their lives rather than fighting for their world, causing their souls to stagnate while referring to Rios and Humbert as examples. As he was suggesting to build an army within the year and so, Alice cut him off by shouting that such a thing would be impossible, yelling that Kirito himself had witnessed the corruption in their hearts of nobles firsthand. He refuted her by affirming that most nobles would be sunk in their cowardice. However, some high-class aristocratic families had still retained their pride as noblemen, and many lower-class nobles and common folk would be willing to protect their hometowns and undoubtedly their world. He stated that if all the weapons held within the tower were to be distributed, and if Integrity Knights taught the people real, polished swordsmanship and sacred arts, it would be possible to build up a grand army within a year. He added that recruiting volunteers alone would gather a large number, stating things such as guard corps already exist here and there. He told her that because an unfaithful army is as frightening as the forces of darkness to Administrator, the only choice is to topple her and utilize the remaining period of time to build a formidable army. In silence, Kirito felt a great cynicism until it was broken by Alice's inquiry whether she could meet Selka if they cooperated and retrieved her sealed memories, which Kirito gave a small nod to. He then explained his prediction that despite Rulid being a day or two trip on a flying dragon from the cathedral, the person reuniting with Selka would be Alice Zuberg, not Integrity Knight Alice Synthesis 30, as the latter would vanish after Alice would regain her memories, as it's merely an artificial Alice created by Administrator's hands. With a stout smile yet a hoarse voice that barely restrained her tempestuous emotions, Alice wailed that she, the other Alice, had stolen the body of the real Alice, saying what has been stolen must be returned, and that her parents, Selka, Yujio, and Kirito himself, all longingly wish for the real Alice to be returned. Then she requested Kirito to bring her to Rulid and give her a glimpse of her family before she becomes the real Alice. Looking at the puffy-eyed girl who stared back, then back at the night sky, he swore to do so, looking back at her with a nod. Replying to Kirito's nod with a curt one, Alice was cut off mid-sentence, stating that she was discarding her mission as an Integrity Knight as she started a piercing scream, her hand pressed tightly against her right eye. Getting up onto his feet, Kirito recalled the scene he had witnessed a mere 2 days ago. Yujio's right hand had burst into crimson tears of blood right after he had sliced Humbert. Yelling at the girl who was experiencing the very phenomenon, Kirito pulled her hand away from her eye, revealing it to be deep red instead of blue. Appearing on her iris was the mirrored image of the word System Alert in English letters. Holding Alice's face in his hands, Kirito commanded her to empty her thoughts, yelling the occurrence was probably due to her rebelling against the church, while wondering who was responsible for it. Alice trembled with her eyelids shut, muttering about how horrible it was not to only have her memories manipulated, but her consciousness itself manipulated as well. Gripping Kirito's shoulders, she asked whether the one responsible for it was Administrator. Kirito's answer caused tears to reform in Alice's eyes, saying that the ones responsible were probably the gods. Alice then shouted to the skies that she was not a puppet and she refused to be controlled. Asking Kirito to hold her, her right eye burst, and warm blood splashed onto Kirito's face. Kirito finally arrived at the 95th floor after climbing for 2 hours from the terrace. He was tired from having to climb with Alice attached to his back due to her losing consciousness from the shock of breaking her seal. After having arrived to his goal, Kirito stated to relax his body, but at that exact moment, Alice woke up and they undid the chains holding them together. Kirito started wondering about what happened to Yujio, and towards that, Alice commented that he must be on a lower floor because he couldn't defeat Berkuli. Kirito decided to look for Yujio by using the Umbra element to track his sword, and as they entered the bath, they noticed that it was completely frozen, and discovered that this was caused by the Blue Rose Sword's Armament Full Control art. Inside the bath, they discovered Berkuli afflicted by the Chief Elder's art, Deep Freeze. Alice started to cry, and after the tears fell on Berkuli's cheeks, cracks started to appear on Berkuli's neck and face. Berkuli was glad that Alice had broken the seal that prevented her from revolting against the Axiom Church, and told Kirito that Chudelkin took Yujio to the highest minister's room before turning back into stone. While Alice held onto Berkuli's shoulders crying, Kirito found the Blue Rose Sword buried in the ice and took it. He also found the scabbard and hung it on the right side of his belt. As he turned around, Alice told him that holding 2 swords seemed to fit him. Kirito asked her if she had seen Administrator before, and Alice answered that once, but she was full of fear. After a while, Alice made up her resolve and started ascending the stairs with Kirito following her while carrying the 2 swords. Alice stopped climbing after reaching the 95th floor again for Kirito to catch his breath and devise a strategy to face Chudelkin. As they reached the 96th, they arrived at a narrow corridor leading to the Chamber of Elders. As they entered, they found spheres with human heads emerging from them and a Stasia window in front of each one. Alice noticed that they were chanting, and Kirito deduced that they were checking the transgression quotient of every person in the human empire. After she watched how the elders were treated, Alice became shocked and decided to kill them to relieve them of that kind of life. But just as she was about to stab her sword into one of them, a voice was heard. They decided to find the source and thus proceeded to a corridor similar to the one from which they came from. At the end of the corridor, they found another room, which this one was filled with gold objects and toys, among which they found Judelkin. Before Kirito could react, Alice had already rushed towards Judelkin, grabbed him, and pointed her sword towards him. Judelkin asked how it was possible for Alice to still be alive, and Alice answered that she had rebelled against the Axiom Church. Judelkin started bad-mouthing the Integrity Knights, and later mocking Alice while remembering how she became an Integrity Knight. Meanwhile, Kirito was thinking about why Judelkin was talking so much, but before he could reach a conclusion, Alice stabbed Judelkin with her sword. However, instead of blood, a red poisonous gas came out. Taking advantage of the diversion, Judelkin escaped through a secret passage. Kirito and Alice followed Judelkin through the passage and climbed onto the 99th floor. Just before arriving, Kirito heard Judelkin chanting. He entered the floor, watching out for an ambush that never came. Judelkin wasn't in the room. After Alice arrived, they deduced that they could only enter the 100th floor through an elevator, which Alice activated with a luminous element, but before they could ride the platform, another Integrity Knight appeared. The Integrity Knight was Yu-Gi-Oh! Kirito could not believe it, but Alice deduced that he must have chanted the art that allowed Administrator to transform him into a knight. Kirito still could not comprehend the situation, but after Alice told him that there was still hope, Kirito made up his mind to fight. Yu-Gi-Oh thanked Kirito for bringing his sword. Kirito tried to give the Blue Rose sword to Alice, but Yu-Gi-Oh snatched it with an incarnation art. While Alice explained to Kirito what happened, Yu-Gi-Oh prepared himself to fight and entered the stance to perform Sonic Leap. Kirito did the same, and the fight began. Alicization Uniting. Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh attacked each other with Sonic Leap, although Kirito used some tricks to make his move faster and stronger. Yu-Gi-Oh managed to match him, making Kirito realize all the extra hours of training Yu-Gi-Oh had. Kirito tried to talk with Yu-Gi-Oh, but he remained silent. While Kirito decided to fight seriously, he also thought about which memories had been stolen from Yu-Gi-Oh. Both skills ended at the same time, and after the rebound, both swordsmen used the same moves. During the clash, the blades got entwined again, and Kirito exposed his thought about fighting Yu-Gi-Oh seriously during their trip to Centauria. After Yu-Gi-Oh burst 5 aerial elements to get some distance from Kirito and be able to retrieve his sword with an incarnation arm, they engaged in another scuffle, during which Kirito managed to make Yu-Gi-Oh remember who he was once again. But because of the piety module, Yu-Gi-Oh could only apologize to Kirito and Alice before releasing the recollection of the Blue Rose sword unwillingly. After temporarily binding Kirito and Alice in ice, Yu-Gi-Oh went to the administrator's room alone. Eventually, Kirito and Alice thawed out of the ice and chased Judelkin into the administrator's room. Judelkin ran towards Administrator and blamed Yu-Gi-Oh for not killing or at least weakening Kirito and Alice more. Yu-Gi-Oh, managing to walk around, then stood beside Kirito and Alice. Administrator ordered Judelkin to freeze Kirito, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Alice using his sacred arts while keeping them alive, and Kirito noted that the room they were in was rather large and intricate. Judelkin generated 20 cryogenic elements on his hand and feet and attacked. He generated 22 thermal elements and released them to create a 5-meter-tall flaming demon that resembled himself. Alice told Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh that she would only be able to distract the flaming clown for about 10 seconds and that they had to win in that time. Kirito decided that the only way to fight him was to use his sword techniques, amplified by incarnation. When Yu-Gi-Oh launched a cryogenic element at Administrator as a feint to distract Judelkin, Kirito unleashed a Vorpal Strike sword skill using all of his strength and causing his clothes to transform. Yu-Gi-Oh watched in awe as Kirito was engulfed in light and transformed into the Black Swordsman from Sword Art Online. Judelkin, who refocused his attention on the trio, and Yu-Gi-Oh watched in shock as Kirito's Vorpal Strike skill, amplified by incarnation, extended to 15 mel and pierced directly through Judelkin's torso. The giant flaming clown disappeared and Judelkin stopped moving, followed by Kirito returning to his usual form and Administrator pushing Judelkin aside. After a discussion about Kirito's homeworld, the future of the human empire, and the purpose of the Order of Integrity Knights, Administrator unleashed the Release Recollection art on the 30 swords decorating the room's pillars. The swords assembled into a large humanoid mass, and Administrator placed the piety module extracted from Yu-Gi-Oh into its center. Administrator ordered the sword golem to attack, and although Alice attempted to intercept it as a distraction, the golem easily deflected her attack and impaled her. Kirito, having circled around the golem, unleashed a vertical skill, but also had his attack deflected and was hit by one of the golem's legs, sending him crashing into the wall. At that moment, Yu-Gi-Oh heard a voice, which came from Charlotte on Kirito's shoulder, telling him to stab Cardinal's dagger into the elevating disc to create a passage. Charlotte exclaimed that she would stall for time and charged at the sword golem. The battle takes a toll on the entire group. Charlotte, Cardinal, who joined the battle, and Yu-Gi-Oh, all to different degrees, die. Just when Kirito was about to surrender, Yu-Gi-Oh, who was basically dying in his hands, encouraged him and used Incarnation to reforge the broken Blue Rose sword, which turned into the Crimson Red Rose sword, and offered it to him. After Kirito deflected Administrator's first attack, both of them activated Vorpal Strike, the impact of which resulted in them losing the right and left arms respectively. Kirito then used another Vorpal Strike skill with the Red Rose sword in his left hand to stab through Administrator's chest. However, this resulted in an explosion which blew both of them away. Glancing at his sword, Kirito noticed that the Red Rose sword had returned to its original broken Blue Rose sword form. Shocked by the outcome of the battle, Administrator retreated to a system console on one of the pillars and used it in an attempt to escape to the real world, but Chudelkin, who had set himself ablaze, grabbed onto her and extinguished what remained of her life with the flame. As the battle had concluded, Kirito ran to Yu-Gi-Oh, who was on the verge of death, in an unsuccessful attempt to heal him. Calming Kirito, Yu-Gi-Oh touched him with Alice's memory fragment, which evoked Kirito's memories of his time with Alice and Yu-Gi-Oh as children, when Kirito and Alice prepared a birthday present for Yu-Gi-Oh. After this, Yu-Gi-Oh suggested naming Kirito's sword as the Night Sky Sword before closing his eyes. After Yu-Gi-Oh's body and Alice's memory fragment had disappeared, Kirito carried Alice to the system console that Administrator had used. After searching through the options, which were mainly in English, Kirito used the terminal's external observer call operation to call Wrath. Hearing the sounds of gunfire and yelling, Kirito guessed that the ocean turtle was under some sort of attack. Once Higa Takeru noticed Kirito's call, he informed Lieutenant Colonel Kikuoka Seijiro, who then told Kirito to find a girl named Alice and take her to the World End Altar, located directly south after exiting the Great Eastern Gate. Takeru then warned Seijiro that the ocean turtle was in danger of losing power, which would result in damaging Kirito's Fluctlight, as the safeties on the Soul Translator were disabled. The Lieutenant Colonel stated that he would initiate a lockdown and told Takeru to get Kojiro Rinko and Asuna to safety. Just as Kirito became aware of Asuna's presence on the ocean turtle, the power was cut, resulting in his Fluctlight being heavily damaged. A nostalgic voice called out to Kirito, one with a ring so dear it made him want to cry, but he was no longer able to remember who the voice belonged to. Alicization Invading. In the aftermath of the battle at the Central Cathedral, Alice's Synthesis 30 took Kirito, who was in an almost comatose state, down to the lower floors of the cathedral and woke Bercruli's Synthesis 1 to tell him about everything she had learned. As some Integrity Knights and ascetics believed that Kirito should be executed for turning his sword against the Axiom Church, Alice left Centauria with Kirito after helping the other knights for 2 weeks. Since Alice didn't have the funds to rent an inn nor the desire to exert her authority as an Integrity Knight, she decided to travel to Rulid Village, hoping that the villagers would welcome them. However, when she met with her father, she was told to leave instead. With the help of Garita, Alice built a cabin 2 kilolu from the village for her and Kirito to live in. While there, Alice used the most powerful healing Sacred Art she was able to, but was unable to heal so much as Kirito's missing arm. Even 4 months after her attempted healing, Kirito's condition remained unchanged. One day, 5 months after the battle at the Central Cathedral, Alice took Kirito, who was now relegated to a wheelchair and unable to speak or move, up onto a hill overlooking a lake where she reminisced about the battle against Administrator and how it had taken Kirito's consciousness. Later that day, Alice, who was now doing simple jobs, such as cutting down trees to earn money, went to the area south of Rulid Village where the Giga Sitter had been to help with yet another tree cutting job. Using one swing with the Night Sky Sword, she chopped down the tree that would have taken the normal workers numerous days to fell. Some of the workers, curious as to how Alice was able to fell such a tree so easily, took the Blue Rose Sword from Kirito, who had knocked over his wheelchair and fallen to the ground in an attempt to retrieve it. Suppressing the urge to sever the hands of the men who took the sword from Kirito, Alice forced them to return it to him. After returning to the cabin, seeing her dragon Amayori to sleep, and making dinner, Alice heard Amayori's cries. The cries drew the attention of another dragon flying in the area, who then landed in the meadow the cabin was located in. This dragon, Amayori's brother Takeguri, was flown there by Eldri Synthesis 31, who offered her some of his wine. Unimpressed by Eldri's flattery, Alice invited him inside if he had important business with her. During the meal, Alice discovered that Eldri was sent to the region to investigate reports of goblins and orcs sneaking in the area and had coincidentally found her during his investigation. Continuing the thought of fate guiding him to Alice, Eldri requested her to return to the Order of Integrity Knights and fight alongside the Human Empire Defense Army. As Alice refused, the angered Eldry blamed Kirito for this decision. In response, Alice rejected Eldry's notion that Kirito was responsible for her inaction and explained that she believed herself unable to properly wield her sword. After Eldry had left, Alice took Kirito to bed, where she recalled what she had heard about the World End Altar, located in the Dark Territory. She questioned what was there and whether it was worth attempting to reach, considering the option of ending everything by taking Kirito's life as well as her own. Unsure of what to do, Alice began to weep. They then went to sleep. Woken by Kirito's weak shaking, Alice pondered what was causing Kirito's unease until she heard cries from Amayori. Rushing outside to find flames rising in the west, she quickly deduced that Rulid Village was under attack by the Dark Territory. Unsure of whether she was strong enough to fight the Dark Territory and save the villagers, Alice stood petrified until she saw Kirito attempting to reach the three swords hanging on the wall. Inspired by his action, Alice equipped her armor under an overcoat and pulled her fragrant olive sword from the wall, after which she leapt onto Amayori and headed for the village. Alice defended the village, her right eye growing back, and thanks Kirito for protecting her. 1 week after the attack by the Dark Territory, much of the burnt-down Rulid village had been reconstructed. Alice once again sealed the cave north of the village before preparing to leave with Kirito, whom she believed might regain his soul while on the battleground to protect the human empire, for the Great East Gate. Alice and Kirito rode on Amayori's back, flying away from Rulid Village towards the east. Alicization Exploding, Alicization Awakening, and Alicization Lasting. For most of the War of Underworld arc, Kirito is kinda just there, in his comatose state. He receives several visits from Asuna, Sinon, Lifa, Alice, and more. Due to the damage his Fluctlight had endured, Kirito relived the worst memories from his lifetime, including the time he abandoned an old friend from the SAO Beta to thugs, the death of Cooper, and that of the Moonlit Black Cats. As the flow of negative memories continued, Kirito relived his moments with Yu-Gi-Oh, including his death. Overwhelmed by his self-reproach for the boy's death, Kirito was about to crush his own heart when Asuna's, Sinon's, and Suga's Fluctlights, connected to his by Higa Takeru, intervened in an attempt to console him. However, at the last moment, Kirito doubts that he could be forgiven, halting the healing process. At that moment, in the real world, the diagram on Higa Takeru's phone that indicated the state of Kazuto's Fluctlight stopped on the very verge of the threshold for recovery, necessitating one more person with a deep bond to the boy to be connected for the process to be completed. Just as all hope seemed to be lost, Takeru noticed that something from the main visualizer, a storage area for data on objects rather than Fluctlights, was attempting to establish a connection with Kazuto's Fluctlight. The moment that Higa Takeru granted the main visualizer access to Kazuto's soul translator in a desperate move, Yu-Gi-Oh's voice reached the Kirito, stopping the boy just before he could crush his heart. Yu-Gi-Oh, reminding Kirito that they would always be connected through the latter's memories, in combination with the voices of the three girls, served as the final push for Kirito's recovery. Before being killed by Pooh, who had been fighting Asuna before, Kirito awakens. Using the Blue Rose Sword, he freezes the battlefield, essentially slowing down the threat of the antagonistic players, but not enough to finish off Pooh. The two go into a fierce battle, with Kirito eventually managing to get an advantage over Pooh. Instead of finishing Pooh off, however, Kirito instead turns him into a tree, where he will be trapped in the underworld for centuries. With one obstacle out of the way, Kirito and company make their way for their final battle against Gabriel Miller. With only a few minutes before it's too late to save Alice and the gang from the final load test, Kirito tries to buy time for Asuna to guide Alice out of the underworld through the World End Altar. The battle begins, and while it seems like Kirito has the upper hand, Miller proves that he isn't a pushover. He transforms into a demon-like state, showing Kirito that he's outmatched. However, with the power of friendship, and I'm not kidding, Kirito literally gets inspiration from his friends, kinda like how Goku powers up his Spirit Bomb. Kirito pushes forward with his signature Starstream Burst, but his attack is interrupted due to Miller cutting off his left arm, but the spirit of Yu-Gi-Oh comes in to help with the final strike, resulting in a massive explosion. Yes, Yu-Gi-Oh, who is dead, helped Kirito, who is alive, kill Miller. With Miller defeated, Kirito is safe to check if Alice and Asuna made it out safely. The World End Altar is empty, meaning that they were successful. However, despite his accomplishment, Kirito's usually calm demeanor breaks down into gut-wrenching tears as he realizes he's now trapped in Underworld for centuries. However, a ray of light shines as Asuna steps out of hiding in the World End Altar. Back in the real world, Alice is by Kirito's bedside as he awakens. Kirito informs her that her sister will be waiting for her in the central cathedral. Weekly, he informs Higa to delete memories of the 200 years he and Asuna had spent in the underworld. Still in bed, Kazuto is visited by Asuna. Kikuoka joins the two of them in the room where Kazuto tells him that they need to protect Underworld. Meanwhile, in secret, Higa boots up a copy of Kirito's Fluctlight, one that retains memories of Kirito's time in Underworld. Kirito gives Higa an update on the situation in Underworld, and Higa updates Kirito on the real-world situation. Both Higa and the Kirito copy conspire with each other to contact Heathcliff, aka Akihiko Kayaba. The real Kazuto, however, returns home from his stay at the hospital. As he lays in bed, he remembers all of the memories from before the 200 years, and he begins to cry as his memories of Yu-Gi-Oh! Reawaken. Suga comes in just in time to comfort Kazuto, and he begins retelling his time in the underworld. The next day, Kazuto receives a mysterious package. In it, he finds Alice naked and in bubble wrap. Once she gets settled, she confesses her feelings about the real world and her current self to Kazuto. They talk it through, and Kazuto shows her around the house. They stop by the dojo and decide to spar. Their attacks are too strong, and they end up destroying their kendo blades, causing Alice to headbutt Kazuto with her steel head. Back inside the house, Kazuto speaks to his parents about his future, and Alice backs him up as he reveals his plans. Later that evening, while in bed, Kazuto is surprised by Alice. She tells Kazuto that she received a message from Underworld and that they must return. Kazuto, Asuna, and Alice meet with Dr. Kojiro, and they're sent back into Underworld to assess the current situation. They're greeted by spaceships piloted by descendants of Tis and Ronye, battling an eldritch-like space monster. Kirito, Asuna, Astasia, and Alice use their powers to defeat the monster. And as a final farewell to the Alicization Arc, Kirito is seen waving towards the two pilots with a Spectre of Yu-Gi-Oh! Waving as well. Did you enjoy our video? Be sure to check out these other great videos from the Amagi. And make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos. I'm Adrian, thank you for watching. I'm out.